He exhausted all his courage to get the girl's contact information. But a speeding truck blew away the note with the phone number into the vast sea of snow. Anxious Jonathan immediately requested the other party to write it again, but was firmly refused. Because the girl always believed in fate's arrangement, and everything that had just happened was heaven's way of preventing the beginning of this connection. Jonathan, however, felt otherwise. Otherwise, why would the two meet that night? After hearing this, Sara decided to give both sides another chance. So she took out a $5 bill and asked Jonathan to write his phone number on it. Then Sara took the bill and hurried across the street to the grocery store to buy a pack of gum. When the puzzled Jonathan asked Sara the reason for this action, Sara explained that if they were truly meant to be, the bill would surely return to her hands, and it wouldn't be too late for them to reconnect then. Jonathan was stunned by this move, but he still didn't want to give up, and immediately countered that, since he had already told Sara his name and phone number, she should also share her personal information with him. Unexpectedly, Sara calmly responded by taking out her copy of Love in the Time of Cholera, stating that when she got home that night, she would write her name and phone number on the title page of the book and then sell it to a secondhand bookstore. If Jonathan could find the book in the future, their fate could continue. But Jonathan knew that fate was elusive, neither visible nor tangible, so he desperately wanted to secure some practical progress. Seeing the anxious look on the other person's face, Sara immediately came up with another idea. Sara pulled Jonathan into the nearby hotel and excitedly stated that both elevators were currently on the first floor. If they each took one and pressed the same floor button just as the doors closed, it would mean they were destined to be together. After saying this, Sara threw one of the gloves she had just bought to Jonathan and voluntarily told him her name. As the elevator doors slowly closed, Sara unhesitatingly chose the 23rd floor, while Jonathan, on the other side, coincidentally pressed the number 23 as well. But fate is always dramatic. Just as Jonathan anxiously waited, the elevator stopped at the 14th floor. Then, a strangely dressed father and son slowly walked into the elevator, and the mischievous boy pressed all the floor buttons. To make matters worse, the elevator malfunctioned midway, causing a significant delay. In those few delayed minutes, Sara, who had arrived at her destination first, left the scene feeling disappointed when she didn't see Jonathan. Little did she know that just as Sara stepped out of the elevator, Jonathan walked out of another one, and the two missed each other regrettably. The outdoor wind and snow are particularly cold, and that elusive, deep affection ultimately turns into a sigh hidden at the street corner. Jonathan did not stop searching, but every familiar figure could not piece together Sara's outline. Time flies, and 7 years pass like sand slipping through fingers. Now Sara has long crossed the Atlantic, returned to her homeland of England, and met a boyfriend who loves music. Although the two seem very affectionate and are likely to step into marriage, when Sara returns home from work one day, she finds the floor covered with petals and a giant gift box. At first, Sara is overjoyed. After all, no woman dislikes a romantic surprise. As Sara unpacks the huge box layer by layer, like dismantling a nesting doll, she becomes even more excited to find a sparkling diamond ring in a small box, almost brought to tears. But what Sara never expected was that when her boyfriend suddenly appeared, ready to personally put the ring on her finger, he discovered that the ring was a whole size too small. Not only that, when Sara pushed aside all her work to travel with her boyfriend, he suddenly had to postpone the trip due to tour commitments. After enduring the trials of reality, Sara had long stopped believing in so-called fate, especially after becoming a psychologist and seeing many young men and women troubled by love. She believed that being obsessed with destiny would seriously disrupt normal life. However, when she was once again stood up by her boyfriend and had to hurriedly return home in the pouring rain, she inadvertently caught a glimpse of the poster for her favorite movie, Cool Hand Luke, which Jonathan had mentioned, at a small pavilion at the intersection, and she once again believed that there is a fate in the universe. Meanwhile, in New York, Jonathan, although introduced to a gentle and virtuous woman by his parents and already engaged, still finds himself unable to resist stopping at old bookstalls whenever he passes by. Unfortunately, every time he opens the cover of Love in the Time of Cholera, it is blank. Originally, Jonathan planned to completely let go of the girl he had only met once 7 years ago, who still tug at his heartstrings before the wedding. But as the wedding date approaches, Jonathan's life is quietly filled with the name Sara. As a director, when Jonathan went to the golf course to interview the big boss, he unexpectedly heard that the coach nearby was named Sara. When Jonathan went to the hair salon to get his wedding hairstyle, the barber serving him was also named Sara. Just when Jonathan thought he was hearing things and was about to leave in a hurry without even finishing his haircut, he saw a cyclist next to him humming a song related to Sara while waiting for the red light. Jonathan believed this was a sign from heaven, guiding him to give up the wedding and search for Sara. Thus, he joyfully arrived at the New York Times, sharing the day's encounter and his initial meeting with Sara with his close friend and the newspaper's editor, Alan, hoping for Alan's help. It was Christmas in 1990 when Sara, who came to New York seeking opportunities, and Jonathan, a native New Yorker, both set their sights on the same pair of gloves in a boutique. With only one pair left, Jonathan gentlemanly offered it to Sara. To express her gratitude, Sara invited Jonathan to try some desserts. During their conversation, they hit it off, feeling no awkwardness, and it was hard to tell it was their first meeting. Jonathan felt they were of similar age and shared interests, with potential for further development. So, at parting, Jonathan took the initiative to ask for Sara's contact information. But Sara, who believed more in fate, thought that if they were meant to meet, they would, leaving only a farewell kiss before resolutely getting into a taxi and leaving. Heartbroken, Jonathan could only prepare to return home alone in the lonely evening breeze. As he reached the subway entrance, he realized he had left his scarf at the boutique. When Jonathan returned to look for it, he was pleasantly surprised to encounter Sara, who had also turned back for her lost item. It seemed fate had been waiting for them here for a long time. And this time, Sara had no reason to refuse Jonathan. They went together to the snow-covered ice rink, where amidst the neon lights, the defenses in their hearts gradually melted away with the coolness of the ice skates, transforming into warm ripples quietly spreading in the cold night. As the night deepened and the crowd thinned, the two felt like old friends who hadn't seen each other in years, still having endless topics to discuss. From life aspirations to childhood anecdotes, from daily life to favorite movies, even those thoughts buried in the corners of time, set aside by the years, quietly surfaced under the backdrop of snow and neon. Just then, Sara accidentally slipped and fell. Seeing this, Jonathan hurried over to help her up, then went to a nearby bench to tend to her scraped arm. However, when her injured arm was revealed, Sara suddenly felt self-conscious. As a British woman, she had many unsightly freckles on her arm. To ease the sudden awkwardness, Jonathan immediately responded that, in his eyes, these were not just freckles, but the constellation Cassiopeia. Saying this, Jonathan took a pen from his bag and began to connect the freckles into the shape of Cassiopeia while telling the legend of the constellation. It is said that there was a queen named Cassiopeia who, by boasting about her daughter's beauty, angered Poseidon's wife. As punishment, Poseidon hung her in the sky forever, causing all her blood to rush to her head. Now she has transformed into the constellation in the sky, which is what Jonathan referred to as Cassiopeia. Despite knowing that Jonathan's words were meant to comfort himself, Sara was still very happy and made an exception by leaving her contact information. Unfortunately, the truck that sped by caused their fate to dissipate in the wind and snow. Although Alan felt deep regret for the brief romance between Jonathan and Sara, he still seriously warned Jonathan that he was to marry his current girlfriend in 3 days and must not ruin the happiness within reach for a woman he hadn't seen in 7 years and whose whereabouts were unknown. However, Jonathan expressed that he was sure he loved his current girlfriend, but she was like the movie The Godfather Part 2. Even if it was better than the first part, he needed to finish watching the first part to understand the plot of the second part. Alan felt that this analogy was quite far-fetched, but before he could refute, Jonathan continued to urge him, saying that Alan, who worked for the largest newspaper in the world, could definitely help him find Sara. Unexpectedly, the search required a full name or social security number, which Jonathan clearly did not know. However, Jonathan did not give up and decided to search the whole of New York with Alan for the book Love in the Time of Cholera that Sara had left behind. Unfortunately, after a whole day of searching with no results, just as Jonathan returned home feeling exhausted and ready to wear the gloves Sara had given him for comfort, he accidentally touched a piece of paper, which turned out to be Sara's shopping receipt from back then. and it conveniently had the credit card number printed on it. Ecstatic, Jonathan immediately went to the boutique, trying to have the staff look up Sara's full name based on the account number, but the staff repeatedly refused to assist. Jonathan had to pull out $20 intending to bribe, but unexpectedly, the staff took the opportunity to raise the price, demanding that Jonathan buy a suit worth several $1,000s to help them meet this month's sales target. Eager to find Sara, Jonathan did not hesitate to try on the clothes and sign the bill, but the staff then stated that they had already checked and the account showed it had expired. Just as Jonathan was about to get angry, the staff cleverly added that when customers pay with a credit card, the copies of the credit card receipts are stored in the warehouse, and Jonathan just needed to go there with the account number to look it up, but he must be accompanied by company staff. When saying this last sentence, the staff emphasized it repeatedly to highlight their importance, implying that if Jonathan wanted further help, he would need to buy other products. But Jonathan was not foolish and would not fall into the same trap again. Thus, the two went to the warehouse together, and after days of searching, they finally found Sara's bill copy among a massive amount of receipts. Unfortunately, the name part was blurred, leaving only an old address from 7 years ago. Fortunately, the staff was quite righteous this time, informing Jonathan that he could go to the Housing Rental Management Office to find out about the residence from 7 years ago. However, when Jonathan and his friend Alan rushed to the rental management office, they encountered obstacles. Due to privacy protection, the intern, as a staff member, dared not operate outside the rules. Alan had a sudden idea and immediately advised the intern that the so-called privacy protection was meant to shield those who were of a similar age to the intern but had established online companies with no physical products, no actual value, and were making huge profits for shareholders through illegal income. And the intern, as an exploited wage earner, had to protect the unscrupulous capitalists who were exploiting him. Wouldn't he feel guilty inside? Clearly, inciting class conflict is the easiest way to stir emotions. The inexperienced intern was left speechless and immediately opened the computer to search for the name. But the result was not the Sara Jonathan hoped for. Reluctantly, Jonathan had to visit the homeowner in person again, with Alan. It turned out that Sara was just a short-term tenant back then, and the real landlord was a Frenchman who had settled in the United States. Although the landlord no longer remembered Sara's full name, he had a deep impression of her and even painted a portrait. However, just as Jonathan eagerly anticipated seeing that beautiful face again, an extremely abstract painting suddenly appeared before his eyes. Despite feeling deeply disappointed, Jonathan did not forget that his primary goal was to obtain Sara's last name. Therefore, he hurriedly inquired about the address of the agency, hoping to find out Sara's information through them. He rushed to the destination as quickly as possible, but unfortunately, the agency had relocated, and this place had become a wedding dress shop. Seeing this, Alan immediately found out the new address of the agency. But when Alan tried to pull Jonathan to continue, Jonathan decided to give up. Not only because his wedding rehearsal was in an hour, but also because the wedding dress shop in front of him suddenly made Jonathan realize that perhaps everything was fate. Otherwise, why was the process of searching for Sara filled with obstacles, ultimately leading him to a wedding dress shop that symbolizes marriage? Unbeknownst to him, next to the wedding dress shop was a dessert shop named Love at First Sight. And just before Jonathan arrived, Sara had just left with her best friend. It turned out that after seeing the poster for Cold Hands Luke in the rain, Sara, who once again believed in fate, decided to follow her heart before the wedding. So, secretly from her boyfriend, Sara bought 2 plane tickets and flew to New York with her best friend. However, as soon as they got off the plane, her friend was very angry because she initially thought Sara was surprising her with a trip for her birthday, only to find out that she was just a companion. More importantly, her friend believed that Sara had become obsessed, actually abandoning her soon-to-be husband to travel abroad to find a stranger she had only met once and had not seen in 7 years. Sara expressed that it was fate that brought her here, and even if she ultimately gained nothing, it would at least provide her with an explanation so she wouldn't dwell on it in the future. Although still unable to understand, her best friend agreed to accompany her until the end. After checking into the hotel, the two began to stroll through the bustling streets of New York. Meanwhile, Jonathan and Alan were also busy searching for Sara, during which they were startled by a spotted dog. After the two left, the spotted dog happened to encounter Sara and her best friend after crossing an intersection. Just as people interacted with the dog, a man dressed in a costume suddenly approached to distribute flyers, which featured the golf course that Jonathan had previously visited. In that instant, Sara seemed to have a sense of connection and quickly rushed to the golf course with her best friend, only to find that they did not meet the person they wanted to see, and instead accidentally touched the chewing gum that Jonathan had previously stuck to the back of a chair during their casual conversation. Moreover, due to her best friend's poor standing position, she was hit by golf balls several times and eventually fainted on the ground. As night fell, to express her apologies and to celebrate her best friend's birthday, Sara took her to a dessert shop called Love at First Sight. The two first reviewed their entire day's itinerary, and then her best friend earnestly expressed that although Sara's thoughts were very beautiful and she believed that there was a plan in the universe, if that were truly the case, what would be the meaning of every choice in life? Her best friend had to admit that life was not a carefully choreographed drama. On the contrary, it was full of surprises and chaos. However, Sara's actions were not meaningless, as they at least helped her recognize reality, which could be considered a form of growth. After hearing this, Sara decided to accept reality. But when the two returned to the hotel, they happened to encounter Jonathan's fiancée, who was also her best friend's college roommate, and thus warmly invited them to join the upcoming wedding rehearsal. Her best friend could not refuse, but Sara, feeling physically and mentally exhausted, politely declined, unaware that she had once again missed the opportunity to meet Jonathan. Meanwhile, Jonathan attended the wedding rehearsal as scheduled, but his displeasure was evident. So after the rehearsal, his fiancée specifically stayed behind to have an in-depth conversation with him. Jonathan admitted that he had been feeling chaotic lately, but promised that he would return to normal in the future. After hearing this, his fiancée finally felt relieved, and then took out a gift she had prepared in advance. However, when Jonathan opened it, he found a copy of Love in the Time of Cholera. It turned out that his thoughtful fiancée believed that Jonathan loved the story of this book so much that he would browse through it every time they visited a bookstore. So she specifically bought him a precious first edition. Moreover, when Jonathan struggled to suppress his emotions and open the front page, Sara's name and phone number suddenly came into view. Surprised and delighted, Jonathan decided to take one more crazy step. Although the phone was unreachable, with the help of his friend Alan, Jonathan found out Sara's current address. Immediately, the two took a night flight to the UK. However, when they arrived at their destination, they found a man and a woman being intimate in the room. In fact, the two inside were Sara's roommate and Sara's husband. But Jonathan was unaware and thought that Sara had long forgotten him and moved on to a new relationship. Thus, Jonathan had to leave dejectedly, while Sara, who was in New York, was enjoying the night view with her boyfriend. It turned out that after learning that Sara had come to New York, her boyfriend also put down his work and chased after her. But as the two wandered aimlessly, they happened to arrive at the ice skating rink where Sara had once skated with Jonathan 7 years ago. Not only that, when they sat on a bench looking up at the stars, Sara was pleasantly surprised to see Cassiopeia. In the past, Sara would have thought this was a symbol of her unfinished fate with Jonathan. But at this moment, she only felt that the appearance of Cassiopeia was an untimely coincidence. The next day, as her boyfriend had to fly to another city for work, her best friend stayed in New York to attend a wedding at the invitation of a classmate, while Sara took a flight back to the UK. What Sara never expected was that when she was about to buy headphones with cash before the flight took off, she not only realized she had mistakenly taken her best friend's identical wallet, but also found a $5 bill with Jonathan's name and phone number written on it inside. It turned out that at the dessert shop, her best friend had inadvertently put this change into her own wallet while checking out. Now, with the bill back in Sara's hands, she once again believed in destiny. So, Sara rushed off the plane and found Jonathan's home based on the address she inquired about, only to be told by a neighbor at the door that Jonathan had gone to the hotel for his wedding. When Sara hurried to the hotel, the venue was already empty, and in an instant, her heart sank, thinking she had ultimately missed her chance. However, the staff responsible for cleaning the venue informed Sara that the wedding had not ended, but had been canceled. It turned out that before Jonathan left for the UK that night, he had called off his engagement with his fiancée, resolutely leaving everything to fate. Although the outcome was not what he had hoped for, Jonathan had no regrets at all. For after days of running around, he was even more convinced that life is not a series of unrelated accidents and coincidences, but a complex collection of events that have long been meticulously arranged by fate. Those seemingly random coincidences and accidents are, in fact, all destined parts of the journey. Just like how Jonathan intended to stroll through the city to sort out his chaotic thoughts, but unknowingly ended up at the ice skating rink where he had skated with Sara. Moreover, he also discovered Sara's coat that she had left behind not long ago. However, at that moment, Jonathan did not know who the owner of the coat was. Therefore, to wait for the lost and found and to reminisce about the beautiful past, Jonathan walked to the center of the skating rink and lay down on the ice, allowing the sudden snowflakes to fall one by one on his face. Until the surrounding tourists gradually left as night deepened, he still had no intention of getting up. Suddenly, a familiar black glove fell from the sky onto Jonathan. When Jonathan turned around in disbelief and could not help but confirm, he indeed saw Sara not far away, waving her right hand at him with tears in her eyes. In that instant, Jonathan was also filled with tears, and then the two slowly approached each other in the falling snow, followed by a deep kiss that melted every snowflake. Soon, the couple rekindled their romance and held their wedding on Christmas Day, as it was the day they first met. From then on, every wedding anniversary, they would sit in a boutique cafe, as it was the place where they first encountered each other. They had missed each other for several years, but fate ensured that in the years to come, they would be together, loving each other as they did at the beginning.